Okay, um, today we're going to talk about a subject that I think um, will be of interest, if not to everyone, but at some level will affect each and every one of us. I hope that this session will continue and perhaps morph into a series. My intention is to not necessarily to talk about anything new per se, um, but perhaps to re-emphasize and perhaps explain in a maybe a simpler, much less complicated way, a subject that I think it's very valuable, a subject that most people perhaps delegate to others, um, both the thinking and the execution. And so, what I intend to do in today's session is perhaps just talk about some very broad um, subjects and ideas, and hopefully this will crystallize and prepare the foundation upon which we can start to build what I think will be a useful learning experience. I'm going to talk about investing. I'm going to talk about investing from a very, I would say, simple perspective. I will have no uh, uh, recourse to look at or to use numbers. So to keep it really simple, my intention today is simply to put some and lay some seeds in your mind. And those seeds, perhaps, for some of you, might uh, bear fruit or might perhaps arouse the curiosity in you to study further. Investing is a topic and is a subject that I've spent a good part of the last few years of my life both studying and practicing. And over the period of time, one of the things that has stood out the most is how easy it can be. Now, recognize that I did not say how easy it is. I said how easy it can be. And it can be easy by choice. The process begins first with a desire. Someone once said that desire is the unexpressed possibility within, seeking expression without. And what that simply means is that I can't give you desire. I can teach you the skills. I can provide you with a philosophy. I can provide you with principles. I can provide you with a strategy. I can provide you even with an execution process. But without desire, nothing begins. Every goal, every dream, every vision begins with a desire. And so, for investing to be easy, you first have to have the desire to learn. It sounds so simple, but it's often misunderstood. Unfortunately, um, most people delegate investing to others. You know, you might have someone who is your brother in law, your brother, sister, family, perhaps a professional that manages your account for you, or someone you refer to, or perhaps a pundit, someone you listen to what they say and you act on their recommendations. I'll start by perhaps putting into context the importance of investing. If you think about how we spend our lives, let's just eliminate the very early stages of your life. You're born, you go through the stages of being an adolescent, and you become a teenager, and then you're able to look after yourself. Nonetheless, the first phase of our life, I will call that a pre-game stage. I'll separate it into maybe five um, key sections. Number one, the ages between, let's use the reference, 0 and 18. Ideally, we can push that forward to 20. We call it the pre-game, meaning you haven't started the game. The second stage is between the age of, we'd say, 20 and 35. Stage 1. Stage 2 between 35 and 45. Stage 3 between 45 and 55. And finally, the fourth stage between 55 and 65, which traditionally was the age of retirement. And then you go to what I call the post-game stage. You have a pre-game, 4 stages, and a post-game. Pre-game is before you begin to work. The post-game is when you've retired. Now, for so many years, 65 was the age of retirement. In many countries, that is changing. I won't go into the details of why that is changing. But let's keep to the 65 just to keep things simple. What you notice very quickly is in each of those stages, your earning ability changes. You start off, I would say, at the lowest entry level if you haven't inherited or you haven't been endowed or you haven't been lucky enough to have either accumulated or inherited a lot of funds or money or wealth during your pre-game stage. So why is investing so important? Well, it's quite simple. There's a mindset that most people have. This mindset is something that is still being taught in schools today. It goes very, very simply that you should study as hard as you can, that education is important, that once you finish your education, that allows you to go into the job market and you should get a job. And if you're lucky enough to find a job, you should always go for a job that provides the most benefits. Pension plan, some healthcare plan, and any other fringe benefits that the company might offer. You should hold that job as long as you can. You should keep your head below the parapet wall. Don't cause any troubles. Don't ruffle any feathers. Be an obedient employee and stay there for the 4 stages of the game. And at 65, you retire, you get a pension, and then you can spend the rest of your life, the post-game show, perhaps enjoying the rest of your life, doing what you, sadly, should have been doing from the early stage, meaning most people spend all their lives chasing and helping others build their dreams with the intention that when they're 65, they can start to live the life that they've always imagined. Okay, we go back to investing. Why is investing important? Well, if you follow that philosophy that we've all, at some level, with the exception of a few, have been taught, you're encouraged to study, learn so that you can actually get a job. You can become an employee. And then you work, perhaps like a slave, but a high-paid slave. It doesn't really matter. But you work until you retire. So for the first 18 years of your life, your parents or your guardians invest in you. The whole intention is for you to become the best you can be. We're investing in what we call human capital. You, the attention being your skill set, your mindset, your abilities, your talents are being developed so that you're ready for the first stage of the game show, where you can actually learn a different type of education. The first pre-game stage, we call it academic education. You learn how to read, you learn how to write. The second stage, when you start working as an employee or in the job market, you start learning professional skills. That takes you through the 4 stages, and then you retire. Investing, however, comes under the genre of financial education, which very little is taught during the pre-game show and very little is taught during the game show. So for most people, 65 years of living, most people have not really understood the principles of investing. And what I find particularly fascinating is, in many cases, we spend, if you exclude the time we spend sleeping, there are 24 hours in a day. Most people will sleep on average for 8 hours. So you have 16 hours left. If you're working, you will spend roughly half of that time traveling to, staying in, and traveling back from work. So the average person would spend perhaps 8 hours every day at work. You might spend an hour traveling to work and 1 hour traveling from work. But if you include how long it takes for you to prepare in the morning, get ready, have breakfast with the purpose of going to work, traveling to work, doing your duties at work, and traveling back home, you find out very easily that you're spending about 10 to 12 hours every day for the purpose of work. Now that's 12 hours at the high end or 10 hours at the low end out of the remaining time you have in the day. 24 hours in a day, less 8 hours. That means you're spending, if you do the numbers well, you're spending approximately 70% of your waking day for work. Now, this is an activity you intend to do for 40 years, based on the average working lifespan or time span. On average, if you were to calculate and understand how much you're perhaps going to be paying in taxes over the lifetime during the 4 stages of the pre-game, you find out very easily that when you add all the taxes you pay, for example, depending on what country you live in, you might find that the average tax you pay in the UK, we have what we might call VAT tax, which is a tax you pay for consumption. So you buy some food, you pay taxes. You buy some form of travel card, you pay taxes. In addition to that, what we call the value added taxes, which is really a consumption tax, you also pay taxes on your earnings. So as an employee, you pay taxes. If you take the average taxes you pay from when you start working all the way up to when you retire, and if you take the average and you add it to the VAT taxes, and in addition to that, all the other taxes you pay, you very, very easily come to the realization that some people will pay close to, on average, between 40 and 50%. If you're lucky enough to be a high earner, you pay 50%, approximately 55% of your earnings over the lifetime that you worked. Now, what this means is that the government owns 50% of your earning ability. In many ways, I like to use the reference where I say you work from January till about April for the government, and then you get to keep the rest. However, of the rest you keep, whenever you spend, you still give the government a certain percentage of that. In the UK, VAT tax or the consumption tax is 20%. So every time you spend, you pay 20% taxes. Now, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to make a point that in principle, you can say that half of your life is going to be spent working for money. In other words, you are a slave. Forgive me for using that word, but you're working for money. Once you've earned the money, you don't get to keep 100%. The government, on average, will make a claim on what you've earned of 50%. So let's assume that you get to keep 50%. Now, of the 50% you keep, you allocate some of it to housing, to transportation, to feeding, to your general expenses. And so the average person at the end of a working day or at the end of a working month or a working year, unfortunately, has less than 10% off the original 100% that they worked so hard for. What that simply means is that the seed, think about it like seed. You know, I give you 100 seeds, you give the government 50 seeds, you give your landlord or your mortgage company 30 seeds, you give the transportation company or you pay for the car, you pay for fuel, 20 seeds. You buy food, 10 seeds. When you finish distributing all the seeds you've earned out of the 100 seeds, you're left with 10 seeds. Now, 10 is a very, I would say, generous number that I'm using. However, I'm using 10 just to make things easy. For most people, it's much less. I talk about the two groups of people. I say poor people earn money, they spend, and then they save what they have left. Unfortunately, most people have the habit of spending more than they earn. So at the end, they have nothing to save. The wealthy people earn, they invest first, and out of what's left, they spend. And if they have anything left, they allocate that to maybe a savings account for further reinvestment. Just two simple philosophies. No one is saying one is superior to the other. It's just a matter of choice. Now we go back to the idea that you have 10% of what you've earned every single month or every single year. Right. Now, in order for you to be able to guarantee that at some point in the future, let's use the retirement age, at some point in the future, that you're able to live comfortably, because the latter part of your life, which should be the best part of your life, for most people, is the worst. And part of the reason is simply because of health reasons. Now, you might be aware of the fact that as a result of genome sequencing, as a result of sequencing your biome, as a result of transformational healthcare discoveries, breakthroughs in biology and chemistry, we are living longer. It used to be that you worked until 65 and then you had a life expectancy of an extra 15, 20 years at most. On average, it was usually between 10 and 15 years. So you lived till about 70 or 75. So all you'd earned during your lifetime, working for 40 years, you calculated that you only needed sufficient funds to last you, for example, 15 years. Now today, because of improvements in healthcare, because of improvements in the quality of how we live, because of reductions in death rates, most people are not dying from the diseases that plagued us at the very early start of this century, or diseases that plagued us at the middle part of this century, like heart diseases and obesity and diabetes. We're learning how to live with these illnesses. As a matter of fact, we are actually discovering cures for these diseases. And therefore, for most people, the life expectancy is now 80 years and 85. And what that simply means, you could live 20 years or 25 years after you retire. Now that should be worrying for most people, especially if you do not have a plan to take care of you during the latter part of your life. And this is where investing comes in. In many ways, Albert Einstein had the best description of what he believed was the most important force in the world. He said it was compound interest. Compound interest simply means that if you have 10% of your seed and you're happy and patient and disciplined and willing to pay the price of investing it and reinvesting the interests and reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting, that your wealth could grow not linearly, but somewhat exponentially. Investing comes in because we use the example of 10%. You cannot live on 10% for your entire life beyond when you stop working. So you have to have a strategy of putting that 10 seeds out of 100 which you have left, or putting the 10% of what you've earned every single month. You have to put that in soil. And so the principle of investing, it starts with using principles that earth or nature is comfortable with. Number one, you need a seed. The seed is what you earn. It's money. The seed could also be your skills, your abilities, which you exchange with other people for money. But we'll call the seed money. So you need seed, you need soil, meaning you need a place to put the seed. There is a principle and a parable called the parable of the sower. It explains a very interesting, in my opinion, probably mind-blowing principle of life. It says a farmer, had seed, went out to sow his seed. And as he scattered the seeds, some fell on good ground, some fell on the rocky ground, some fell amongst the thorn. And here's what's interesting. Each type of soil produced a different quality of crop. In the rocky ground, there was no crop. Amongst the thorns, as the plant started to grow, the thorns choked it to death. But what was, in my opinion, quite fascinating was of the seed that fell in good ground. The account of the story says that some of the ground produced 20%. Some produced 30%, some produced 60%, and some produced 100%. And here is the point. Not all soils are created equal. So what investing helps you do is recognize what type of soil is best for you. So I said you need seed, you need soil, you need a season. A season. So you need to recognize that there is a time to sow and there is a time to reap. There is a season to sow, there is a season to reap. You cannot do both at the same time, and you cannot do both at the same season. And as a matter of fact, if you do your sowing in the wrong season, you have no harvest. So understanding seasons is just as important as recognizing soil or even having seed. Number 4, you need supply, or what I call a source. And that simply means that there is a force around this universe that we are still trying to understand. Some people have different names that they call it. I like to be very careful about what I label it, because there is a principle that says whatever defines you limits you. And whatever definition you give something, you've limited that thing by the definition. I'll give you a good example. If you call yourself a boxer, you say, I am a boxer. And if you see yourself simply as a boxer, you limit yourself. It means if someone said to you, can you teach? You say, no, I'm a boxer. If someone said to you, well, would you like to work in banks? You say, well, I have no skills, I'm a boxer. So what has defined you, in other words, the way you've created your self-image of yourself, limits you. Now, our self-image is what we call the governor of our performance. You cannot perform at a level consistently above your self-defined concept or your self-image. So whatever you define something as, you've already placed a limit on it. Now, there is a force, an intelligence in this universe that we don't know about. What we know is we put seed in soil, and we hope. We hope nature, some forces, some intelligence produces the harvest. None of us sits down at the end of the day and starts to draw up calculations and processes of how to grow a crop. No, we don't do that. All we have to do is put the seed in the soil. So you need seed, you need soil, you need seasons, you need a supply. Those 4, in many ways, is what investing is all about. Recognizing what is good seed, number 1. Recognizing what is good soil, number 2. Recognizing when to sow, the seasons, number 3. And recognizing the supply. And that simply means learning to work with what I call grace or nature. That is investing. It's really that simple. You don't have to think about it so complicated. And so in this series, what I will be doing is going through a step step-by-step process on how you can take whatever seed you have and how you can multiply that seed simply by doing the right things. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. I'll try to keep it as in my, whatever limitations I have in my ability to explain ideas. I'll do my best to present it as though I was teaching myself, my 17 or 18-year-old self, what I would say to my younger self. That's my intention. So I would say this: you spend and you will spend over the lifetime that you have, on average, half of your life working for money. Investing is the principle that allows you to take whatever you have left and have it to work for you, so that at the end of the period, whatever that might be, that could be your retirement age, or that could be a date you've set for yourself when you want to be free. At that period, when that period comes, you find that you do not have to think about money. There is a difference, clearly, between working for money or working to live and living to work. I'll let you decide which of those two perhaps you think is more suitable to and for you. So I'll stop right here and I'll simply say this. I will talk about investing broadly. I'll start with defining what investing is all about, explaining the mindset you need to be an investor, explaining the principles, explaining the philosophy. That's the key thing. The mindset and the philosophy is what separates good investors from average investors. I will also explain speculation, what that means. I will take you through processes of understanding assets, types of assets, how to analyze, how to understand those assets, how to appraise those assets, how to value those assets, perhaps how to hold or perhaps acquire and keep those assets, and how to dispose, if necessary, those assets. With the whole intention being that at the end of this investment series, I will in many ways be repeating a lot of what I've shared already. There are no new truths. And I'm going to be simply showing you in some areas, not all areas. The fundamental is already there, but I'll be showing you different pathways because everyone is different. I heard something beautiful. Someone once said that truth is like the center of town. There are many roads and many pathways to get there. But when you arrive, you're there. And so my views are my views. I'm not saying or suggesting that they are more superior to other people's. What I would say this in conclusion to you is this. Whatever you learn from me, whatever you hear from me, recognize that I'm explaining and sharing my philosophy. I'm not explaining the philosophy. So you shouldn't simply be a follower of what you hear from me. I'd like you to do something. I'd like you to listen, learn, but then I'd like you to learn, research, listen to other people, and then ask yourself a simple question. Could these ideas that Mensa has been sharing, could it take me towards my goal? Will it help me achieve my goal? Whenever the answer is yes, then use the ideas. Learn more, make course corrections. Effectively, adapt the ideas to suit who you are. Whenever the ideas will not take you towards where you want to be, discard the ideas, let them go. Now, in many ways, sometimes you're not really ready. So I would recommend that spaced repetition will be the key to your success, irrespective of who you're learning from. So for example, you might listen to me and say, I don't really understand what he's saying. I would ask you not to give up hope. Come back and listen to it perhaps in a month, and listen to it again in a month, and perhaps it might start to make sense. You see, in many ways, a teacher cannot install the desire in you. That comes from within. A teacher opens the door. You have to walk through the door. So my responsibility will be simply share what I know as much as I can. I'll be very open. I'll be very transparent. But I'll share what I know. I'll share my principles and my philosophies. And I'd like you to take those philosophies and don't just apply them to your life. Study them, debate them before you apply them. I'll give you a suggestion, and this comes from debating. I don't know how it's done lately, but if you go back and if you were in a debate team, one of the key things that always happened, if you had a good debate coach, is that you were giving a topic. Your teacher, your instructor would say to you, this is a topic. But you're never told whether you will be debating for or whether you'll be debating against the topic. You're asked to prepare. A day before, 2 days before the debating session, you're then informed on which side you will be on. Now that's beautiful and powerful, because what that meant is that it allowed you to study and research and be objective and not be wedded to one viewpoint. And on the day of the debate, you would present a viewpoint. And here was the whole idea of that philosophy, is that you've only earned the right to debate someone else when you can state their viewpoint just as well as they can. Now that's the principle I use in my life. If I'm going to debate you, if I'm going to talk about a subject that you disagree with me about, I always say to myself, can I debate you at the same level or better than you can? Can I take your position and argue your position just as well as you can, or better? If the answer is no, then I haven't earned the right to debate you. Likewise, whatever you're going to learn from me in this session, take the information, but I want you to start asking questions. Is this correct? Is this possible? Is it plausible? Is it probable? Is it possible? Question the ideas so that you can find places where you might say, I disagree. Now that questioning process enables you to do your own research so that you're not simply someone who follows other people. I like you to be a leader, not a follower. So in closing, I'm excited. It's been, I guess it's probably going on 5 years since I actually did a session. And so I'm excited. And I look forward to perhaps sharing new ideas. And here is the key thing. When I teach, I learn. So I'm looking forward to learning. I'm looking forward to perhaps hearing back from you. And what I will do